What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Renewable Energy Smart Pod. I'm your host, Sean McMahon, and today I want to start things off with an apology. An apology for the sound of my voice. You see, I came down with a mean case of the flu about 10 days ago, and I'm still trying to bounce back. My voice isn't 100%, but as they say in the business, the show must go on. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive about a report that was recently released by the World Bank that analyzes the economics of electric vehicles for passenger travel. And with experts in agreement that the transportation sector needs to be a key target of any effort to decarbonize the global economy, I promise you, this report is a treasure trove of information. In a minute, I'll be joined by Nicolas Pelletier-Taiberge, the Global Director for the Transport Sector in the Infrastructure Practice Group of the World Bank. Now, when most people think of EVs these days, they think of a Tesla or a Rivian. Me, I think of a Ford F-150 Lightning. The truth is, the menu of electric vehicles is expanding rapidly. But most of those EVs zoom around roads and cities in places like the US, Europe, and China. This report, produced by Nicolas and the rest of the team at the World Bank, focuses on the role an electric vehicle build-out can play in low and middle-income countries. Countries where the majority of miles traveled are traveled on either two-wheel vehicles, three-wheel vehicles, or buses. I'm including a link to the report in today's show notes because I found it fascinating. You can also see the report and other related materials on the web at www.worldbank.org/moving-to-zero. Nicolas and I have a lot of ground to cover, but before we get started, here's a quick word from the exclusive sponsor of today's episode, EDF Renewables.
EDF Renewables is a market-leading independent power producer and service provider with over 35 years of expertise in developing onshore and offshore wind, solar, storage, and electric vehicle charging systems. EDF Renewables, energy your way.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. My guest is Nicolas Pelletier-Taiberge from the World Bank. Nicolas, how are you doing today?
Very good. Thank you, Sean. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. We're here to talk about a report that the World Bank just issued. It's a deep dive on the economics of electric vehicles for passenger transportation. What can you tell me that report that you and your team put out?
So, Sean, let me step back a bit and tell you why this is important. We have 1 billion cars in the world today. According to certain prediction, we should get between 2 and 3 billion cars by 2050. So that's a doubling or tripling of the stock of vehicle in the world today. And we know that most of these additional cars are going to come from developing countries and emerging economies. Motorization is a natural consequence of development. In fact, we did some research at the World Bank showing that when per capita income doubles, the level of motorization increases by 40%. So the number of cars increases by 40%. And that's obviously is good because people become richer. They get opportunity to move, which give them access to jobs, to economic opportunities, to social services. But it has also some implications from a climate change perspective. We know that transport emissions today represent about a quarter of global emissions in the world today. They are the fastest source of emissions. Transport-related emissions represent 8 gigaton of CO2. They will reach 18 gigaton if the trends of motorization continues on a business-as-usual scenario, while we should reach 2 gigaton by 2030 if we want to stay on track with the 1.5 degree scenario under the Paris Accord. So that's the amplitude of the problem we are facing. 8 gigaton today, 18 if we don't do anything, 2 that we must achieve by 2030 if we want to stay on track. Now, transport decarbonization is therefore a very important imperative. This is something that we take very seriously at the World Bank, and it's actually one of our top priorities today in the countries we work with. We work with many developing and emerging nations all over the world. The way we frame our transport decarbonization work is usually by using a common framework that is well known in the transport community called the Avoid, Shift, and Improve framework. So avoid means avoiding unnecessarily traveling. For example, we can achieve that by densifying cities, bringing people closer to their jobs. Shift means shifting to cleaner modes of transportation. This can be public transportation. This can be biking, walking. With COVID, there was a renewed interest of people in biking. It can be moving to rail transport, moving to river-based transport, and then means improve the carbon efficiency of each mode of transport. And that's where electric mobility becomes relevant. So the question we asked ourselves before launching this report is that many countries all over the world are interested in electric vehicle today. The growth is spectacular. The electric vehicles represent 9% of the global market today. They are expected to reach 13% by the end of this year. They are on a track on a double-digit increase for some market segment, but many of that is currently happening essentially in rich nations. So, and the question we were asking is that a relevant solution for the developing world? And we have many countries who are approaching us today and asking us, look, I see all this transition happening. Can you help us assess whether this is relevant and how we can push this agenda and for what market segments? Is it for electric cars? Is it for electric motorbikes? Is it for electric buses? Where should we start and how can we do that? So that report really started from that question and we try to answer all those issues through this research.
Okay, so what were the major findings from this report?
So let's talk a bit about the methodology that we use. No, so what we did is we selected a sample of countries, 20 countries that are representative of the diversity of the countries we usually work with. So it goes from very low income countries, fragile countries to quite advanced emerging economies. And in those countries, we looked at a scenario where they would progressively introduce electric vehicles in all market segments. So electric cars, electric motorbikes, what we call the 2 and 3 wheelers segment, which is very relevant in many developing countries, and electric buses. And we looked at a scenario where those countries would reach 30% of all the new vehicle that are injected in the market would be electric by 2030. Then we removed all the fiscal distortions because what happens is usually, many countries, gasoline is taxed, electricity is subsidized. It's not always true, and there are some variation, but normally that's what's happening, and so that creates some distortion in the way you can evaluate the economics of electric vehicle program. So we removed all that, and then we monetized the benefits that you can get from electric vehicles. For example, greenhouse gas emissions. We used a price of carbon, which is very reasonable. It's $40 per ton to monetize those global GHG emission benefits. We also monetized air pollution benefits because that's a really important also consequence of electric vehicles is that in many cities in the developing world, where air pollution is a serious issue, there are actually 4.5 billion of people that are dying in the world from air pollution today. And so this is a big health challenge, that beyond the global benefits that you can get, but it's a really a health and development challenge for many of the countries we work with. So we monetized also those benefits. And then we did our traditional, cost benefit analysis and economic evaluation of those programs. And the findings are quite striking because in the 20 countries that we studied, in fact, in 17 of them, there is a strong economic case for the 2 and 3 wheelers. Those electric motorbikes, they are moto taxis that are commonly used in many countries. And in 16 of those 20 countries, there is an economic case for electric buses. Now, individual cars is a different issue. They are still very expensive for most people. The charging infrastructure is not developed. So the case is not as strong. And in fact, in only a few countries, individual cars would be a relevant solution today, but it may be in the future. But really, there is a very strong case today for these market segments for 2 and 3 wheelers, and and electric buses. Now, so that's really a very important conclusion that tells us that those countries are totally right when they are asking themselves, well, should we start thinking about electrifying our fleet and looking into e-mobility? You know?
Okay, yeah, just to reiterate that most of the findings here were stressed on like 2- and 3-wheelers and also electric buses. We did an episode in the past with Horace Luke from Gogoro and their battery swapping technology for 2- and 3-wheelers. So our audience is pretty familiar with that now. Getting back to the policy side of it. So if you're a policymaker in one of these countries where the economics, as you've laid out, makes sense, and from a development perspective, it might lead to less inequality, or I should say better equality, what kind of policies should these leaders be considering or in fact implementing to leverage the power of electric vehicles for passenger transportation?
So there are different policies, and some are on the transport side, some are on the electricity side. And let's start perhaps with the transport side. The main obstacle to the dissemination of electric vehicles today is well known, is the very high upfront price. You know, there is a cost differential of 40 to 60% for electric buses, 60 to 80% for 2- and 3-wheelers, and more than 90% for individual cars. Now, so even though during operation you can recover some of this upfront cost because the maintenance of electric vehicles is lower and you save some money. Our finding is you save over $5,000 over the life cycle of a vehicle. You still have an upfront problem. So it's not a technical problem, it's a financing problem. And there are different policies that can allow to overcome this challenge. I mean, the first one is all the leasing schemes that we can think about. Since the battery is about a third of the cost of electric vehicle, if you can have a swapping a system for batteries using battery as a service type of schemes, that's one way to do it. And some countries are successfully embarking in that approach. Another way to do it is to separate the ownership from the operation. And that's a solution that some cities like Santiago in Chile, like Bogota in Colombia, Brazil is looking into it as well, in Rio de Janeiro, for example. They created what they call an asset management company that buy and owns the buses, and then they rent or they lease them to private operators to provide the transportation services. So that's another way to build a financing scheme that can be attractive to private operators.
Let me just jump in real quick there. Are there any cities that are doing that with the personal transportation vehicles, like 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers? Because if you look around certain cities, you see like the city bike programs and things like that, where it's a fleet of bikes and users kind of subscribe to it. Are there any cities that are doing that with the electric bikes?
So for 2- and 3-wheelers, what a country like India is doing, which is a very innovative financing solution, is to work with the financing sectors and the banks. Because what happens today in a country like India, if you want to buy an electric bike or motorbike, the financing terms that you will get are much less favorable than for a conventional bike or motorbike. So, and to give you a very concrete example, I mean, normally if you go to see a bank in India and with the project to buy an electric motorbike, probably you will get an interest rate of something like 21%, a maturity, so a repayment period of 24 months. While if you buy a conventional, the equivalent electric internal combustion vehicle, you will probably get financing terms of 16% and 36 months. Now, so a big difference that reflects the risk perception that financial institutions have of this market. Also because they don't know it, it's new, they don't. What India has been doing is, well, can we design some risk sharing mechanism that can lower that risk perception for financial institutions. So they built what they call first and second loss guarantee mechanisms, and we've been working with them to try to optimize those solutions that will reduce that risk and then hopefully lower the terms and get on par with a traditional vehicle. So that's another way to do it that is very relevant for 2 and 3 wheelers. We are watching with a lot of interest was how India will implement that, because if that works, that's a solution that can be replicated in many other countries. Including in Africa. It's right now in countries like Rwanda. 80% of passenger vehicle kilometer that are done in this country are done with 2 and 3 wheelers. So there's a lot of demand for. That's how people move, basically. So if the India solution works, the next one will be Rwanda, Kenya, all those African nations where 2 and 3 wheelers are such a relevant solution that will be ready to replicate it. And finally, another way to address this upfront financing challenge is, again, what India has been doing, but also some other countries, to try to generate economies of scale, and to pull the demand by launching larger tendering. For example, one problem is if one single city wants to start an electric bus program, at most they are going to procure a few hundreds buses. So that's not enough to lower the cost, because just the number is so small. But what a country like India has been doing is then they, instead of letting each city do their own tendering, they pulled several cities and several states, and they were able to launch tendering processes of 5,000 buses. They have these what they call the big challenge, where they want to reach 50,000 buses, which would be a total game changer in the electric buses industry, and that will generate enormous economies of scale based on the what has already been achieved in India, but also in Chile. We observe usually a cost reduction of something like 30%, sometimes up to 50%. So that's really a way to drive costs down and address this upfront cost problem. So that's a few ideas that are out there right now that are being tested by countries and look very, very promising. And us at the World Bank, we're trying to help those countries on both the advisory, but also we are a bank, so we try also to help on the financing side to implement those solutions.
We'll be right back.
EDF Renewables' purpose is to build a net zero energy future with electricity and innovative solutions and services to help save the planet and drive well-being and economic development. We're committed to providing future generations with the means to power their lives in the most economic, environmental, and socially responsible ways possible. We understand the importance of managing energy integration in a way that also enables clean energy projects to improve the electric grid. Our tailor-made solutions can solve energy challenges facing our customers, no matter the size or complexity. EDF Renewables. Energy your way.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some very innovative ideas coming out of the finance side and the policy side in terms of transportation. What about on the energy side? It seems like if we electrify more and more vehicles, then the grid's got to keep up. So what did your report find on that? What kind of questions did it tackle, and what kind of answers did it find?
So on the energy side, one of the common questions that comes is, should we start now or should we wait until the grid is clean? Especially in those countries where, and there are many of them, where electricity is predominantly produced from fossil fuels. Does it make sense to electrify the fleet if electricity is produced by coal? So we looked into that, and our findings were very consistent with many other research that were done in this area. And the conclusion was that it does make sense, even in a country like Kazakhstan that we studied, where most of the electricity comes from fossil fuels. We found a reduction in GHG emissions per passenger kilometer. And the reason for that is very simple. It relates to the relative energy efficiency of electric vehicles vis-a-vis internal combustion engine. And the way it works is that an electric engine will convert a quantum of energy into movement by 87 to 91%, while an internal combustion engine will probably be below 20%. And in the countries where we work with, where the fleet is very obsolete, many old cars, used cars, that efficiency is actually even lower. So that's what's happening. So even if the electricity is not clean, you gain so much from this efficiency gain of transitioning into electric mobility that at the end you get some GHG savings. So that's one really important conclusion, and that from the policy implication there is that we shouldn't wait. It shouldn't be sequential. First you clean the grid and then you move into electric vehicles. You can do that in parallel. The second conclusion on the which is totally different on the power side is the importance of charging infrastructure. There are different type of way to introduce some incentives to push for the adoption of electric vehicles. And in many countries, mostly rich nations, because it's very costly, giving some premium, some grants to households who buy an electric car. I mean, in some countries, you can get $12,000 if you buy an electric car. So what we did is we compared what would happen if you take the same amount of money and instead of putting it to incentivize the acquisition of vehicle, you put that in charging infrastructure. And the result was that the impact to accelerate the acquisition of electric vehicles would be 6 times higher. And so that's really...
Just real quick, let me stop you there. So you're saying the $12,000 incentive, places like the US, we've got new tax incentives for electric vehicles. You're saying it's actually 6 times, more effective if it's rather than go in an individual person's pocket, it goes towards the charging infrastructure for the wider grid?
That's what we found. So
6 times. Wow. Okay.
6 times more effective in giving an incentive, and it's not that surprising in a way. I don't know if you have an electric car. I do, and I'm always worried about will I be able to find a charger when I travel? No. And so in the decision, in the individual decision to transition into electric vehicles, the availability, the density of the charging infrastructure plays an enormous role. And what that result shows us is that it's even more important than getting a bonus, an incentive, subsidy when you buy an electric car. So that's that's a conclusion that is perhaps a bit less relevant for developing countries because there are only a few of them will look into individual cars, but e-buses and 2- and 3-wheelers, the charging is a bit different. You can find ways to charge during the night, off peak, but it is still quite important to have a look at whether the energy supply can follow. So our conclusion in the 20 countries that we studied is that in general, the impact on the energy demand is going to be relatively limited. Also from the fact that, remember, we looked at a scenario where it's 30% of new cars. So before the entire stock of vehicles becomes electric, it will take some time. In 2030, that impact on the energy supply is going to be relatively limited. We found 1%, around 1% in most of the countries we looked at. However, there are some countries, and I'm thinking about some of the poorest countries we work with, countries in the Sahel like Burkina Faso. For them, it can be an issue. If you accelerate too quickly the spreading of 2- and 3-wheelers, at some point you're going to hit the wall on the issue of energy supply, and your energy supply will not be able to follow. So that's something to keep in mind for those countries. And basically, it means that what can be done to in parallel increase access to electricity and develop energy supply. So I think on the energy on the power side, I mean, these are some of the conclusion. Perhaps one additional conclusion from that work that we did is the fiscal implications. Because you remember I mentioned that in our study we removed all the fiscal distortions, the subsidies to electricity, the taxes to gasoline. So we looked into what are the implications if you transition aggressively into electric mobility. What are going to be the impact on your fiscal revenues? And the conclusion there is that as long as you are in the early phase of that transition, it's relatively limited, couple of percent at most in the countries that we studied. But at some point, it's going to be an issue. So you have to anticipate that and think about what are the fiscal reforms that we need to do in order to keep our budget balanced and our fiscal standing sustainable.
Okay, and what does the interaction look like between the public and private sector? A lot of episodes we do, it kind of talks about where the governments and policymakers kind of lay the groundwork for the private sector to kind of really grow something. So where does that handoff take place? Well, what do you see as more important? Getting rid of the upfront costs for the two-wheelers and three-wheelers and buses, or getting the grid ready? Or is there any tipping point there where the handoff goes from public to private?
So many of those solutions are going to come from the private sector. So it's the role of government is to find the right incentives. Some of them are on the regulatory side. Some of them are on the ecosystem. So, this issue of the charging infrastructure is very much something that the governments have to look at. And then there are what are the fiscal incentives that you can introduce. And that's where this issue, what do you subsidize? The acquisition of vehicle, what's of the charging infrastructure, working if for a country like India, which has a car manufacturing industry, and what they did also is to work through their industrial policy with their car manufacturing industry to prepare them for that transition. Also, so that's also another way to accompany. Working with the financing sector, looking into those financing schemes that we were discussing before, the leasing innovations, the battery as a service model, who are the player, how you diversify, how you increase competition, how you go to scale. All these are things that governments have to think about. No.
Yeah. Speaking of governments thinking about and policymakers, COP27 just wrapped up a couple of weeks ago in Egypt. Were you there in Egypt?
Yes, I was. I was there, and it was really interesting because during the past COPs, transport sector has been a bit on the back burner and has not been gaining as much attention as. And there are some reasons for that. The energy is front stage, and there are some good reasons for that. But transport is a part of the problem, and therefore can be part of the solutions. And I think that COPs 26 in Glasgow was a bit of turning point for us, for those of us who work in the transportation sector, because it put back transport on the radar. No? Under the UK leadership, there was this zero emission vehicle transition council that was created. For us, we launched an initiative and the creation of a new financing instrument called the Global Facility to Decarbonize Transport, and we received significant contributions at COP26 from the UK, from the Netherlands, from Luxembourg, from Germany. And we are using these funds now to help those developing countries and emerging economies who want to engage on an e-mobility strategy. This fund is already active. We are supporting all this work that I was mentioning in India is partially financed from this new facility. We are helping a country like Ghana, for example, to look into the economics of introducing electric buses in their public transportation system. We have a portfolio of about 44 activities today, to push the e-mobility agenda with the countries we work with. So what is interesting is that I think Glasgow started really a momentum that continued at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. There was a lot of discussion on e-mobility, not only and beyond that on transport decarbonization. The UK, for example, launched a new initiative following their zero emission vehicle council program that they call the rapid response mechanism. And the idea is to put a system that is a bit of a one-stop shop now, where you can, for countries who are interested in embarking on an e-mobility program, to help them identify and get access to the multiple resources that are out there to help them. We are part of that mechanism. India was the first country in Sharm el-Sheikh to sign an agreement to get support from this rapid response mechanism. And I think that looks very promising. And now I think that future COPs, we are already starting conversation for COP28 with the UAE, and I'm confident that this is going to remain high on the agenda in the future.
Okay, so just stepping back for a second. So looking at all the information gleaned from this report put out by the World Bank, and information from your conversations at COP26, it sounds like in Glasgow, and COP27 in Egypt. One of the things I like to ask guests to do on this show is give me their bold predictions. So if you wanted to take a shot at what the role electric vehicles would play in passenger transportation in, say, 5 years, what does that look like around the world?
So I think we are going to see a a diversification of the market. Many new players are entering all the segments. Cars, batteries, 2 and 3 wheelers, buses. This is going to lower costs down. We are going to see a very rapid spreading of 2 and 3 wheelers in the developing world. We're going to see e-buses almost systematically looked as a possibility each time there is a public transportation program. Individual cars will take more time, and I think there will be more conversation between transport and energy on the issue of charging infrastructure. And, transport and the energy sector, sometimes these are different ministries. Sometimes they don't talk one to another. But now there is an alliance that is being to be forged on this. And I think it's going to continue and it's going to lead to very promising results.
Well, hey, Nicolas, I really appreciate your insights. This is a wonderful report from you and your team. I'll make sure we include a link to it in the show notes. And I've enjoyed our conversation today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sean. I enjoyed it.
Well, that's our show for today. But before we get out of here, I want to say one final thank you to the exclusive sponsor of today's episode, EDF Renewables. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And be sure to follow us on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter, where our handle is @RenewablesPod. And if you'd like a daily dose of renewable news delivered to your inbox, head to smartbrief.com and sign up for the Renewable Energy Smart Brief. The Renewable Energy Smart Pod is a production of Smart Brief, a future company.